It's just that I love food. I don't really know any other way of describing how much I love my job. I'm one of those lucky, weird people that actually can go to sleep every night thinking how much I love my job. And I'm so grateful that for some reason I ended up where I've ended up.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Many people come to Australia for the chance of a different life, for opportunity, as young kids with their family, for a new adventure. But there are some that go the other way, born in Australia, but through work, opportunity or circumstance head abroad with their family to grow up in different surrounds. Kay-Lene Tan is the head chef of Tonka and executive pastry chef of Tonka and Coda in Melbourne. Kay-Lene, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You've got a hell of a couple of roles at the moment. You sound like you're pretty busy.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been an amazing journey with Tonka and Coda and Adam De Silva. So I can't complain. It's been amazing.
You were born in Melbourne but grew up in Singapore. Tell us what it was like, food in the family and in Singapore.
So when I was, I think about 3-4 years old, my parents moved back to Singapore from Melbourne. And I think for me, I'm very lucky that they did, because Singapore has such a rich and, diverse food culture. So I grew up around tons and tons of incredible food from every single kind of place you can possibly imagine from around the world. Because Singapore is so multiracial, I was very exposed to a lot of different food from like India, Malaysia, and you've got like Thailand, and we're basically in Singapore, you're like the hub pretty much of Asia. And my mum and my grandmother are both Peranakan, so they themselves are really, really good cooks. So I also grew up with a lot of really great home cooking as well, which I think is what fueled my love and passion for food.
Can you tell us about some of those feasts that you had as kids?
A lot of them surround, celebrations like Chinese New Year, Christmas. Even for me, even the simplest act of eating together as a family for dinner, like everyday dinner, was really nice. We all come together, and back then was before the days of having any kind of mobile phone, social media, etc. So when we sit around the dining table, it was truly about talking about each other's day, getting to know exactly what each other was up to. So it's like a little catch-up session, with the family. And, my mom always made sure that we had a meat and veg and rice. I think that was the staple. And then every now and then she'd get a little bit creative and try to make things like fish and chips. I think one of a very fond memory I have was when my brother and I had chicken pox. And I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I do remember that it was a very painful experience. And I'm sure that it was much more painful for my mother, who had 2 children under the age of 7 who had chicken pox at the time. And I remember it was around my birthday and I couldn't go out, couldn't do anything. My brother and I obviously were like quarantined, I guess you would say, for a week. And my mum tried to make us fish and chips. But see, my mother is a person that doesn't believe in deep frying, because she feels like deep frying, you get a lot of oil splatter. It's a big mess to clean. My mom's one of those people who keeps her kitchen in a very pristine condition at all times of the day, every day of the year. My mom's kitchen is the cleanest kitchen you could ever step into. And she tried to make fish and chips. I don't actually remember whether or not I was successful, but I appreciate the fact that she even tried. And I remember her putting a candle in the fish as well, which was kind of funny. But that's my mom. She always tries her best. And that's one of my fond food memories from being a child.
Well, great home food is one thing, but what led to you entering the industry and deciding to become a chef?
That's actually a really funny story. So, after I graduated from high school in Singapore, I actually went into documentary production for about 4 or 5 years. Yeah, so I have a diploma in mass communication. And after that, I started working in documentary production. I did a little bit of feature writing on the side, dabbled in like advertising and public relations and all that kind of stuff. And when I reached the age of like 24, I started seeing all my friends obviously graduating from university, starting careers that they were really passionate about. And I think I always say this, I had what I call my self-diagnosed quarter life crisis. I started wondering to myself if the job I was doing then would be something that I could do for the rest of my life. And I'm a strong believer in the whole philosophy of if you have a job you love, you never work a day in your life. So I started thinking about, what I actually loved. And I think that's so important when it comes to, especially it comes to cooking. So I think everything from the moment I started questioning my future kind of fell into place. It was kind of serendipitous in that sense. I was working for a food magazine at the time called Cuisine and Wine Asia, and they were doing a piece on a school in Singapore called At Sunrise, which was at Fort Canning Park. And I was like, oh, that seems kind of cool. Maybe I'll go check it out. And I went for an open house with a recommendation from my friend's mother. I went there, and all I can say is that the moment I stepped in, I fell in love. It was like, where have you been my whole life? And also watching copious amounts of Top Chef on TV, which is like the reality show that my best friend introduced to me. And I just love the adrenaline of that show. You're watching actual professional chefs in a cooking competition, and yes, I know there's a little bit of reality drama and all that kind of stuff, but for the most part, it was very exhilarating to me. And of course, I know that now being a chef for over 10 years, that being a chef and watching reality TV is so very different. It takes a totally different kind of skill set. But that's how it all started. So I enrolled myself in At Sunrise. I did a 17-month diploma in pastry and bakery art. And yeah, so that was the beginning. And oh my God, it was more than 10 years ago.
Well, you worked at some pretty incredible, or with some pretty incredible chefs early on. Tell us about the early days in Singapore and the restaurants that you worked in.
So, like I said, my entire journey with food has always been very serendipitous, right? So after I graduated from my apprenticeship, which I did at the Sentosa Resort and Spa with some really great chefs, and being in a hotel obviously gave me a very rounded idea of what being a chef was going to be, because we had a restaurant there, we had a bakery, we had a pastry shop, we had a pastry kitchen. We did Sunday brunch, we did large numbers in that restaurant. So for me, it was kind of getting a feel of what it would actually be like working in a hotel. And the time that I graduated, for some reason, it so happened that Chef Joel Rubuchon was opening his flagship restaurant in Singapore. And I thought to myself, that's where I wanted to work. And it was an immediate, that's where I want to go. And for me, making that decision was purely based on the fact that I was just starting out in, culinary, being a chef, or the journey to be a chef. And I really wanted to make sure that I had very, very strong foundations, especially being specialized in pastry. And I thought, where better to start than with the chef that has the most Michelin stars in the world. He has restaurants all around the world. He's renowned. He is himself actually also was a pastry chef. And he obviously, along his journey, deviated and also became a savory chef, and a very renowned one for that matter. And I was actually really nervous applying for the job there because I didn't know if I would get it. Because I was just fresh out of school, still bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, very optimistic. I had no idea what I was in for. So I had no idea whether they would actually pick me. And I still remember going through a lot of trying to get my friends who I got to know in mass communications, who actually kind of helped me get a position in that restaurant. So I went through kind of a lot of people before I actually managed to get my resume in there. And I also still remember that they actually posted me to the savory kitchen initially. So on my first day of work, I went in and I was like, wait, hang on. I'm not a savory chef. And I still remember Chef Tomonori, who was the executive and head chef of Joel Rubuchon in Singapore. He kind of looked at me, and he's this really tall Japanese guy who speaks French. And he just looked at me, and I think I froze up. I didn't quite know what to say to him. And he was like, are you sure you want to do pastry? This is your last chance, he said to me. I was like, yes, I'm sure I want to do pastry. And then he like shakes his head, like kind of disappointed at my decision. And then he just leads me to the pastry kitchen. But for the most part, he's a gentleman. Like I really enjoyed, I didn't work very closely with him, but I really enjoyed my time working at the restaurant.
What was it like working in that kitchen?
Okay, this is way before like I knew anything from anything. So I would have to say that it nearly broke me physically, mentally, and emotionally. And looking back on it now, 10 years have gone by, I would say that I'm very grateful for the experience. But I still remember that at that point of time, I think it got to the point that I nearly gave up. That was how hard it was. You're working with classically trained French chefs who have been working for Monsieur Rubuchon for over 10 years. Like I mentioned Tomonori Danzaki, and he's been, at that point of time, he was working for Rubuchon for like 18 years. And he still is working for Monsieur Rubuchon. So you can imagine the kind of mindset that these chefs have. It's very regimental. It's very unwavering. They know things to be a certain way, and they want the standards to remain that way as well, because obviously they have an immense pride in the work that they produce for the restaurant. So coming in there and not actually knowing head from tail very much, and not understanding the kind of standards you're expected to live up to, I think a lot of us copped it pretty bad in that restaurant, like all of us generally. And I saw a lot of people walk out, and I myself at one point of being there nearly walked out as well. It was so hard. There's actually no words to describe how hard it was. I've had Paco tins thrown at my head. I was like, I was screamed at, spoken to in French, probably getting insulted and cursed at. But at that point back then, I had no idea what they were saying. So I was just kind of like, oui chef, désolé chef. That's it. You have no idea what they're screaming at you. I've broken down many times, and it actually got to the point that my mother actually asked me, like, why are you doing this to yourself? I would come home every night crying, and I would tell her, like, I'm not cut out to be a chef. This is not for me. I can't do this. And she literally held my face in her hands, and she was like, darling, why are you doing this to yourself? Just quit, And it nearly got to that point. But it's kind of funny because I think after you reach the breaking point and you get over that hump, I don't know whether I would say I saw a light or whatever, but I actually got to the point that I stood up for myself. This is a story I haven't actually told anyone, much less a podcast. So after this whole conversation with my mother, and mind you, this was like months and months and months of torment, right? Not so much torment, but like discipline. Months and months of discipline. And I went to work and once again had another altercation with a chef. And I'm not going to mention any names because now he's a friend, right? And I had this big altercation with a chef, and I just stood there thinking to myself, am I going to continue down this road allowing this person to continue to demean me and make me feel that I'm not good enough? Because I know that at that point I was trying my best. And I still remember we were cleaning down the kitchen at that point, and I just snapped. I don't know what came over me. I was so afraid. I knew in my heart on that day, I was like, yep, I'm getting fired. Like, there's no way I'm coming back. There's absolutely no way that he wants me to come back in the kitchen again. So I had a big fight with the sous chef, the pastry sous chef, and we were yelling at each other at the top of our voices. I stormed out. I slammed the kitchen door and I walked out. Yeah, and I walked out. And because Joel Rubuchon's restaurant was in Resorts World Sentosa, there was like a small area outside that when I walked out, I just sat there for like about 20 minutes, like trying to calm myself because I was shaking, I was crying. It was just very, very, very dramatic. And I was thinking to myself, yep, that's it. That's the end. So I walked back into the kitchen about after 20 minutes and I saw my sous chef sitting on the bench. And then he looks at me and he just says, "Ça va, Kay?" And I was like, "Ça va, chef." And then he's like, "Oui." And then he just stood up. And then he walked over towards me. At this point, very calm, shakes my hand. And then he just says, "Arma," and he walks off. And I was like, what just happened? And I was like, okay, maybe I'm going to get it tomorrow morning. Okay, because by this time this thing happened, it was already 1 a.m. So I was like, all right, we need to get to work. I need to get to work at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Go home and, face the fate tomorrow, I would say. And then the next day came and nothing happened. It was very weird. I was just like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then we just went along our merry way. He went on a holiday. I think he went to Vietnam. This sous chef, he went off to Vietnam, came back after a week. And then after the week was up, we had an appraisal because I had already been there for about a year. So I was like, all right, appraisal time. And there were like 4 of us who were commie ones at that time. Commies, I would say. And I thought to myself, yep, that's it. This is the end for me. I am not getting promoted. I'm not going anywhere. And I walked to my appraisal with my pastry chef, Antonio. And I sat there thinking to myself, still remembering this altercation, right? That just happened maybe about a month ago. Thinking to myself, like, that's it. And surprisingly enough, I got promoted.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. They promoted me to demi chef de partie, and I walked back to the kitchen and the sous chef I had the argument with kind of just stood there, and I was like, I'm a bit confused. And he said to me, it needed to come out of you. And I was like, what do you mean it needed to come out of me? And obviously he's like speaking a bit of like, his English is not 100% perfect. And I looked at him and I was like, what do you mean it needed to come out? And he was like, you needed that release. And I don't know whether it's because I fought back with him that I earned his respect for some strange reason or whatever. But ever since that day passed, then everything changed. Suddenly I didn't get yelled at as much as anymore. We had conversations like adults. So after stepping away from it now, it kind of makes me wonder whether all that was just, you know how like in the army, they train you till you break. And then when you come out of it, you're just that much stronger. I don't know whether that's part of the regimen, but I know it's very scary to say this now, but I look back on that really fondly. I'm so weird. Oh, but yeah, I do look back on those days now, and I it's funny because I just you know how Facebook gives you memories and stuff, like what happened this day 10 years ago, and I saw a photo that we took, the entire team, the Alatelier and the fine dining team took in front of Joel Rubuchon just as it opened. And I looked at the date, and believe it or not, it was nearly 10 years ago this month. Yeah. So, and it's funny because I posted that photo on my social media, and I started talking to all the chefs that I hadn't had contact with for so many years. And a lot of them are still with Joel Rubuchon still working for his restaurants, and some of them have branched out. But, it's kind of nice talking to them now and reminiscing about the times and things that happened when we were in the restaurant. So,
well, you were one to definitely branch out, and you've done some pretty incredible things all over the globe. But what led to you coming back to Melbourne?
So after I finished with Joel Rubuchon, I'll fast forward a little bit. I started working with at Jason Atherton's restaurant, Pollen, with a really great pastry chef called Chef Andreas Lara. He's actually my pastry mentor. He taught me a lot. So I was at Pollen for about a year. And honestly, if Andreas had stayed in Singapore, I think I would have stayed with him forever. But he ended up getting posted to Hong Kong to open, I think it was Aberdeen Street Social in Hong Kong for Jason Atherton. So at that point of time, we had just come back from, Andreas was invited to Australia to do a demo with Boyron, I think. And I come here, my brother was already here. So I visited him during that trip. And I thought to myself at that time that I really wanted to get out of Singapore to try to work in another country, experience another kind of culture. And for a while, I was playing with the idea of going to New York. And it was really far away from home, which was part of the reason why I kind of decided against it, because I didn't want to be that far away from Singapore. So my mom actually said to me, you actually are Australian. Like, why haven't you ever thought of going to Australia to work? And it never really crossed my mind. I don't know why. it just didn't. So that was part of the reason why I decided to come here. And plus, my brother was here. My mom was like, at least you guys will be together, and plus, Australia's not that far from Singapore as well. So if anything were to happen, you're only like 8 hours away, as opposed to being like more than a day away. So that was part of the reason why I came back to Melbourne.
This episode is proudly supported by Montague Plums, handpicked for you.
So the eating experience of our plums is sweet. That's a primary driver. It's got to be sweet, but it's also got to have enough acid, because the mix of acid and sugar is what gives fruit its flavour. And in a plum, it tends to be slightly higher acidity. And then a really nice, full, not dry, but juicy explosion of juice into your mouth as you bite into it. That's nirvana for us in terms of a plum.
For more information, go to montague.com.au.
You currently have a huge role at Tonka and Coda, but over the last couple of years, you've won scholarships and you've won awards, and you've got the opportunity to work with some of the world's best chefs like Dominique Crenn and Ana Ros. Tell us about what it was like working with those people.
The reason why I chose to go to Atelier Crenn with Dominique Crenn, and the reason why I decided to go to Hisa Franco to work with Anna was purely for the fact that I really look up to them as role models. And being in their restaurants and receiving the hospitality that I did when I was there really shone a very bright light on the kind of manager and the kind of chef that I want to become. So with at Atelier Crenn, I worked with Chef Juan Contreras and his pastry team at Atelier Crenn. And Chef Juan is really cool. He's probably one of the coolest pastry chefs I've ever met. He has no social media. You cannot find him anywhere on Instagram or anything. And I asked him, isn't it difficult being a chef, especially in this day and age, without social media? And he said to me that when you cook, you don't cook to please anyone, like visually, but yourself. And he said at the end of the day, as long as you are happy with what you've created and it is your best, then the people who are coming to the restaurant to eat it or to experience it will feel that love that you've put into that dessert or that dish that you've created. And he says he doesn't believe on putting things online because he's just not that kind of chef. And, especially in this day and age, that's very unusual and very unique. And a lot of his accolades and stuff, like, Chef Dominique actually, she promotes him a lot on her own social media, which I find, very heartening. And it's even in her Netflix on Chef's Table, she speaks so highly of him as well. And you can actually see the kind of bond that they have together, and it's very admirable that they managed to meet each other and are working together, you know, so well. She's also the kind of person, like when I was there, she's very warm. Like, you know, sometimes you meet your role models and they don't turn out to be like how you expect them to turn out. But she, from the moment that I met her, she was just warm and friendly, and she's always bubbly and very fun. And like, I still remember the first time she walked into the pastry kitchen and she said hello. You know, she came up to me and she asked me for my name, and you know, she was just very warm. She said, enjoy your time here, you know, we're so happy to have you. And you know, and she was very obliging and all that kind of stuff. But the one experience about being in Atelier Crenn that really stuck with me was when I think it was a Saturday. I could be wrong, so forgive me if I get the day wrong. But she calls a restaurant meeting. So Atelier Crenn, Bar Crenn, all the staff, front and back of house, we all gather in the Atelier Crenn dining room. I think this is like maybe 2 or 3 hours before service. And she stands and she gives a brief breakdown of what happened during the week. She shares with the team accolades that at that time when I was there, it was like the fact that they got nominated for 50 Best again. She tells everyone back and front of house the good things that have happened, areas that need to be improved. She calls out certain people like by name and tells them like, thank you to this person for doing this particular thing this week, you know, and also this person came up with a great idea for like a dish or something like that. And, you know, it just felt very inclusive, which is very rare, especially, I mean, I personally have never experienced that before. So I stood there kind of an observer in a way, but I could see how all these people could feel like in that restaurant that they were a family. It's because like they all were in this, like back in front of house, like they were all there to enjoy the accolades, to listen to, so no one is left out of the loop, which is actually really, really pretty great, I felt. And the same thing, you know, happened when I was at Hisa Franco. Like the moment I went there, and I'm sure you know about Hisa Franco that Anna actually lives upstairs. So Hisa Franco is actually her home. It's a home. So the first day, I still remember landing in Slovenia, being incredibly jet lagged because it was a very, very long flight. And the first person I meet when I walked in was Walter, her husband. And he's sitting outside the restaurant and they were closed on the day. And he comes to me, he goes like, hi, how are you? And I was like, good. And from that moment, he was just like, do you want some water? You're looking very tired. And it's that, again, that warm hospitality that, you know, they extended to me, even though they had no idea who I was. You know, he helped me take my bags to the dorm. And it's that same inclusive atmosphere that you get there, because obviously the staff dorms are on the premises as well, you know, and nearby. So in the nearby little town, there's a few like staff accommodations, but everyone lives so near, like all the staff lives so nearby. So it was a very, it was like a little community, I would say. So I stayed in the dorms. I think I was there for about 2 weeks. And, you know, she actually asked me if I wanted to stay for a week or I wanted to stay a bit longer. And, you know, given the chance to stay longer, I was like, oh, of course I would stay for 2 weeks. Like, why wouldn't I? So thankfully, Melbourne Food and Wine were really accommodating with that. They were like, yeah, of course, you're welcome to stay longer, you know, and, you know, the accommodation was on the premises as well. And the same thing in that kitchen, you know, everyone's very united. Everyone talks, you know, on the days off that we have. I think, to be honest, right now, I don't even remember what day it was because everything was a blur. But the 2 days we had off, everyone would just kind of hang out together. You know, they had, I think on the second day I was there, they had like a small get together. They had like a barbecue and everyone was there. So once again, it was that very inclusive kind of kitchen environment. We ate family meals together, and it was really nice. Like, we would sit outside looking at the mountains, snow-capped mountains. It was so picturesque. It was like being in a fairy tale. And we just all sit outside having lunch together, you know, just getting ready for lunch service, for example. And it just felt like a family, which is the one thing I took away from both these restaurants, is that feeling of family. And it's something that I try my very best to bring into Tonka as well. Because from the day that I stepped into Tonka, that was always the feeling that was there. I know sometimes it's kind of gone, sometimes during the 7 years that I've been there, it's kind of gone awry a little bit. But I mean, like every family, nothing's perfect all the time. We go through bumps and hurdles, but at the end of the day, we come out a lot stronger. And, you know, that is what I always try to, the kind of environment I try to build at Tonka, is that I always remind them that we're not just a team, but we're a family. And that Tonka is somewhat like your home. I mean, you spend more time at work than you do anywhere else in your life. So if you can't feel at home at where you work, then it's never going to be a place that you look forward to going. And I try to make sure that they feel that way when they're at Tonka. So, yeah, in a nutshell.
You're the executive pastry chef at Tonka and Coda and head chef at Tonka. Is there challenges involved in managing and being so high up in both of the venues and treating them differently?
I think the great thing about working in Tonka and Coda is that I have a lot of really talented young chefs that work with me. Like at Coda, for example, I work with this really young and talented and very tenacious pastry chef called Joanne, and she's very young. She's very hungry, and I appreciate that so much in her because, you know, she's constantly wanting to push herself. And, you know, I told her, I think over the last 1 year, especially like through COVID and stuff, and ever since they made me the head chef at Tonka, I said to her, like, look, I can't do everything at the same time. Obviously, I'm gonna need help. So I said that I think you're ready, like, to create your own menu at Coda. You know, make that little pastry area yours. And if you need any help, I'm always here to have a chat. You know, if you need any kind of like advice of, you know, flavor pairings or like how you want things to go together. And she's been executing my menu at Coda so successfully for so long. Like, I think, you know, for her, you know, I have no doubt in my mind that she was ready for that challenge to create her own menu and to basically take charge of the section. You know, if you don't give people the opportunities, you're never gonna know how far they can go. So with her, you know, she's started doing, you know, her own things on the menu, and it's been really, really great. She's taken somewhat of the template that Coda had with their dessert menu and basically ran with her own ideas, which I'm very, very grateful for. And, you know, we talk probably once or twice a week. And every time she has a problem, she comes to me. If I have a problem, I'll go to her. And it's that really great partnership that we have that I'm very, very grateful for.
Well, tell us about desserts. Tell us, how do you create desserts and what makes a great dessert?
Believe it or not, I actually don't like desserts. Controversial. I'm more of a potato chip kind of girl. Like, I know I love a good packet of salt and vinegar. But what makes a great dessert to me is a great balance of flavor. I don't like desserts that are overly sweet or overly sour. So my desserts always have a hint of salt, which I find, and it's not just like salt that you put like a pinch and you can't taste it. Like for me, the salt in my desserts, usually one of the elements, it's quite pronounced. Like you can tell like, yep, there's salt in that. And I feel that it brings a different layer of flavor to desserts. And a lot of the desserts that I create are based on memories from my childhood. Like, flavors or ideas or desserts that I or my family have enjoyed. Like for example, the Tonka carrot halwa dessert was based around my mom's love for carrot cake. My mom loves a good carrot cake, and everywhere we go when we were in Singapore, she would always be on the search for the perfect carrot cake. Although until today, I still don't know what this perfect carrot cake tastes like. I can only imagine it because she's constantly waxing lyrical about this perfect carrot cake. But the dessert that I created at Tonka was based on that flavor profile of like walnuts, cream cheese, carrots, and apricot, because I love apricot. But that was the first dessert, one of the first desserts I created for Tonka, and it was based on that. And I think every now and then I get like sparks of inspiration. Like one of the desserts that I really enjoyed as a kid was this ice cream called potong ice cream. So it's a really cheap ice cream. I think it's only like 60 cents or something. And they come in different flavors like red bean, they've got like palm seed, and they have corn. So one of these, like maybe 2 years ago, I went through this thing about I cannot find potong ice cream in Melbourne. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to try to make it myself. So I created a corn and coconut bomb Alaska, which was like, it's vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, nut-free. So it was like the perfect dietary dessert. And that ice cream for me tasted like home, that corn ice cream. I know I was met with a lot of opposition. They were like, corn is so controversial, no one's going to order it. But it tasted good. And I think that's all that really mattered, to be honest.
You came from the world of discipline under Joel Rubuchon and went to Dominique Crenn and Ana Ros for inspiration. Tell us about the impact of that and what sort of leadership you provide where you are at the moment.
I have to say that the one chef in my life, aside from the three amazing chefs that I had the chance to work with, Chef Joel Rubuchon, Dominique Crenn, and Ana Ros, and they are all amazing, amazing chefs that I had the opportunity to work with. But the one chef that actually showed me the kind of leader that I wanted to be was Chef Andreas Lara. And he was always the kind of chef that you could joke around with. He would always have stories for you when you were working with him on the line. And he taught me that to be a leader, you don't need to scare people or bully people into listening to you. And I still remember there was once I was working with him and I accidentally, I don't know whether I would say accidentally, but I burnt a tray of puff pastry. And this was already when I was like 6 months into working with him. And I still remember that I forgot to set the timer on this oven. And he smelt it and he was like, "Kay, what's that? Like, I smell something burning." And I was like, "Oh shit, like I burned the puff." So I pulled out the tray and I put it on the table, and he looked at me and I was like so sure he was going to scream. And he just walked up to me and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Kay-Lene, I'm not even angry. I'm just disappointed. You can do so much better than that." And he just walked off. And I tell ya, that was scarier than getting a Paco jet thrown at you. I like that immense sense of guilt and disappointment that you've let down someone that you hold in such high regard. That pain, man, you don't come back from that. You're just like, wow, I am so, like, there's not enough apologies that you can say to make up for the fact that you've completely screwed up this tray of puff pastry. It suddenly feels like the end of the world. But that is the kind of leader that I've always wanted to be. Like, I understand that I have to say I'm not innocent of not losing my temper, of not screaming, of not being a hard person to work with sometimes. Like, I'm quite sure that there are people out there who will say like Kay-Lene is probably the worst person to work with or the hardest person to work with. We all have our moments, but I, for the most part, try to be as humane and as I possibly can, which is a lot of the time, actually. In fact, if you go into Tonka now and you ask them, how am I to work with? I think a lot of them would say like, I rarely lose my temper. And that is something I always try to do. Like, especially in a kitchen setting, sometimes you just can't help it. It's just, tensions run high. You need things to be at a certain place at a certain time as soon as possible. Because there are obviously customers waiting. And sometimes tensions run high and you just can't hold back. And I'm not saying that chefs have to be, caring and loving 100% of the time. Because they're obvious. I mean, we're all only human. But at the end of the day, I think what's important is walking away from that and going like, pulling that person aside and going like, is everything okay? Is there a reason why this wasn't done in a timely manner? And finding out whether this person is going through any struggle. And that's what I've been trying to do in Tonka as well. Sometimes you can kind of sense when one of your chefs is having an off week or an off day. And sometimes I feel pulling them aside and having those conversations actually opens up, a bigger conversation that you might not know that you would have. Like, for example, I think one of the most recent stories that I would have was I had a conversation with one of my apprentices who I could feel that he was going through something because his work had been slipping over the last 3 months. And, I really care for this apprentice, and he has always been a very integral part of my team. And I could see that he was kind of slipping. So I pulled him aside and I was like, is something wrong? Like, what's going on? Like, obviously there's something that's happening. And, when he spoke to me and to two of my colleagues, because we all sat together to discuss the situation that was happening, I found out that he actually might not want to be a chef anymore. And it's not because of anything that's happening at Tonka, because he made that very clear. Like, I love working at Tonka. It's just that I don't know whether this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. And he said to me, I was actually really scared about talking to you. And I was like, I'm a career changer. I changed my career when I was 24. So if anyone knows what you're going through right now, it's me. I know that it's scary to want to change your course, but it's not too late. And he's only like 20, 21, I think. And I said to him, it's never too late to want to change your path of what you want to do. And yeah, so he's going to complete his apprenticeship and we'll see where we go from there. But, it's having those conversations and letting them know that you're there for them to listen without judgment. And I think that's the most important thing.
Well, you changed careers early on and for something that you love. How do you see your career now? What do you love about what you do?
I love being around food every day. That's it. That's plainly it. It's just that I love food. I don't really know any other way of describing how much I love my job. And I say this every day to my best friend. My best friend's in Singapore. She works for an amazing fashion brand called Love Bonito. And I always say to her, Vanessa, I'm one of those lucky, weird people that actually can go to sleep every night thinking how much I love my job. And I'm so, so grateful that for some reason I ended up where I've ended up today. And when I look back at the last 10 to 12 years of my career, sometimes it's kind of hard for me to believe that It's kind of hard for me to believe that I've gotten to this point. And I'm very grateful for all the opportunities that have been given to me over the last 10 to 12 years. And yeah, I love food so much. I also love being able now to be a mentor and hopefully someone that other people can look up to and go like, hey, it's not impossible. And I know especially being in certain kitchen environments, I do completely empathize with how hard it is. And, especially now with putting a lot more attention on mental well-being and all that kind of mental health, which is, I find, is so important, because when you're not in the right frame of mind, especially being in a kitchen where, you know, everything is hot and sharp, there are a lot of much worse things that could possibly happen. And, you know, when I don't know, like when I was younger as well, like when I was in grade school and in high school, I was bullied a lot. So I didn't really have friends until I was about 14 or 15 years old. And until then, it was just, you know, being... And I have to say that I cannot possibly compare how I was bullied from when I was a kid to the way that children these days are being bullied in schools. Because now it's like people are using things like social media to attack a person's life and family, which is, it's really scary to see. But I guess if there's anything to take away from everything, is that there is a silver lining, and you just have to either go find someone to talk to. For me, I had my mum, who was always, you know, my strength throughout everything, and my brother as well, because, you know, their fierce loyalty and love for me really helped see me through those really, really difficult times. But, you know, find someone to talk to, and, you know, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. And I can't say every story will be like mine, because obviously everyone has their own struggles as well. But I have to say that I can empathize with those really difficult situations.
Well, Kay-Lene, that's great advice, and we've loved having you share your incredible stories on Deep in the Weeds today. And I'm sure there's so many more. I think perhaps we could catch up again down the line and check in on how you're doing with everything and hear some more stories. But we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.